I woke up from emergency surgery to find out my son had sold my house. The house I'd lived in for 43 years. The house where I'd raised him. The house that held everything I owned. He'd forged my signature, filed fraudulent paperwork, and pocketed $370,000 while I was unconscious in a hospital bed recovering from a stroke. He thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. But what my son didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that hidden within the walls of that house was something that would completely destroy him. Not money. Not jewelry. Something far more valuable and far more dangerous. If you want to know what I'd hidden, how I'd hidden it, and what happened when it was discovered during the renovation by the new owners, stay with me. And please, before we begin, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because this story is about betrayal, yes, but it's also about the long game of justice and why you should never, ever underestimate a mother who spent decades preparing for the worst. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Catherine Blake, and I'm 68 years old. The day I woke up in the hospital to discover my son had sold my house was a Tuesday in October, 3 days after I'd been rushed to the emergency room with what the doctors said was a significant cerebrovascular event. Medical speak for a stroke that should have killed me but somehow didn't. I was disoriented, weak on my left side, struggling to form words, but I was alive and conscious, which is more than my son Jonathan had been counting on. The nurse who told me was young, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable with delivering news that wasn't hers to deliver. "Mrs. Blake, your son was here earlier. He said he needed to tell you something, but you were sleeping. He asked me to let you know that he's taking care of your house situation." House situation? The words came out slurred, my stroke-affected speech making me sound drunk. "He said he sold your house, that you'd discussed it before your stroke, that it was too much for you to maintain alone. He wanted you to know so you wouldn't worry." I felt my heart rate spike. The monitors started beeping. The nurse looked alarmed. "Mrs. Blake, you need to stay calm. Call my lawyer," I managed. "Patricia, Chen, number in phone. I don't think now." The desperation in my voice must have convinced her because she found my cell phone in my belongings and scrolled through my contacts until she found Patricia's number. She made the call. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Catherine? Are you okay? Jonathan called me yesterday saying you'd had a stroke. He sold my house," I said, each word an effort. Silence. Then Patricia's voice, sharp and focused. "He what?" "Sold it. While I was unconscious. Need you to check. I'm on it." "Don't worry. I'll handle this." But I was worrying. Because if Jonathan had actually managed to sell my house, if he'd forged documents and committed fraud on that scale, he was either desperate or stupid or both. And what he didn't know, what I'd never told anyone, including Patricia, was that my house contained evidence of something that would send him to prison for far longer than real estate fraud ever could. Let me back up. This story doesn't start with a stroke or a stolen house. It starts 43 years ago with a young woman named Catherine Morrison buying her first home with money saved from years of working as a bookkeeper. I was 25 years old, newly divorced from Jonathan's father, raising a 5-year-old son alone in an economy that didn't favor single mothers. The house was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in a working-class neighborhood. It needed work. The roof leaked, the plumbing was questionable, the electrical system was from the 1940s. But it was mine. I'd saved the down payment myself. I'd qualified for the mortgage myself. It was the first thing in my life that was truly, legally, indisputably mine. I raised Jonathan in that house. I watched him grow from a 5-year-old who cried for his absent father to a teenager who resented me for not giving him the life his friends had, to an adult who looked at me like I was an inconvenient reminder of where he'd come from. Jonathan was complicated. Not bad, exactly. Just fundamentally selfish in ways I kept hoping he'd outgrow, but he never did. As a child, he'd steal from my purse, small amounts, $5 or $10, thinking I wouldn't notice. As a teenager, he'd forge my signature on permission slips and report cards. As an adult, he'd borrow money and never pay it back, ask to stay for a few weeks and stay for months, promise to help with bills, and then disappear when it was time to contribute. I made excuses for him. Single mothers are good at that. We tell ourselves our children's failures are our failures, that if we'd been better, richer, more available, they'd have turned out differently. I told myself Jonathan was still finding his way, that he'd eventually mature, that underneath the selfishness was a good person waiting to emerge. I was Wrong. Jonathan got married at 28 to a woman named Melissa who seemed nice enough, but was clearly attracted to the man Jonathan pretended to be: successful, ambitious, generous, rather than the man he actually was. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, who I saw perhaps 3 times a year despite living in the same city. Jonathan worked in sales, or at least that's what he told people. The reality was he drifted from job to job, always getting fired or laid off, or deciding to pursue other opportunities. Melissa worked as a dental hygienist, and from what I could tell, she was the stable one, the breadwinner, the person keeping their family afloat. Over the years, Jonathan would come to me with opportunities that needed investment, business ideas, get-rich-quick schemes, pyramid schemes thinly disguised as legitimate enterprises. He needed money. Just a little money. Just to get started. Just to get through this rough patch, I said no. Every time. I'd learned that lesson. Never loan money to someone who sees you as an ATM rather than a person. That's when Jonathan started looking at my house differently. Started making comments about how it's too much for you to maintain, how you should downsize, how we could sell this place and get you into a nice apartment. Always we, like it was a joint decision. Always framed as concern for my well-being. I knew what he was really thinking. That house represented money. Equity I'd built over 40 years. A nest egg he wanted access to. 5 years ago, when I was 63, Jonathan brought up the idea of putting his name on the deed. Just in case something happens to you, he said. So there's no probate issues. So the house passes smoothly. I have a will, I said. Wills get contested. This would be simpler. No. Mom, I'm just trying to help. No, Jonathan. The house is mine. When I die, it will pass according to my will. But until then, it stays in my name only. He was angry, though he tried to hide it. Fine. I was just trying to make things easier for you. That's when I started documenting things. Because I'd realized something important. My son would try to steal my house. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not obviously. But eventually he'd find a way. I started keeping records. Every conversation where he brought up selling, downsizing, transferring the deed. Every time he came over and snooped through my paperwork. Every instance of him asking invasive questions about my finances. I recorded conversations on my phone. I saved emails and texts. I built a file that documented a pattern of behavior, and I started hiding that file. Because if Jonathan did try something, if he did manage to gain access to my house, I needed evidence that would be discoverable, but not by him. Evidence that would protect me and expose him. Over the next 5 years, I created what I called my insurance policy. I took the most damaging documents, the recordings, the financial records showing his attempts to manipulate me, copies of forged signatures I'd caught him practicing, screenshots of texts where he discussed with Melissa how much my house would be worth, and I sealed them in waterproof containers. Then, during a kitchen renovation I did 3 years ago, I had those containers built into the walls. I didn't tell the contractors what they were sealing up. I just asked them to create hollow spaces in specific walls, spaces where I could hide flat packages. They thought I was eccentric. I let them think that. I hid 12 packages total, behind the kitchen backsplash, inside a false panel in the bathroom, between studs in the living room wall, in the attic insulation. Each package contained USB drives with recordings, printed documents with notarized affidavits about Jonathan's behavior, financial records, everything I'd collected. Each package also contained a letter. The same letter, 12 copies, addressed to whom it may find this. The letter explained who I was, who Jonathan was, and why I'd hidden this evidence. It explained that if someone was finding this, it meant Jonathan had likely done something terrible, sold my house without permission, or worse. It asked the finder to please contact my attorney, Patricia Chen, and turn over the evidence. I sealed the packages. I told no one. Not Patricia. Not my friends. Not my neighbors. And I waited. I didn't want to use them. I hoped I'd never have to. I hoped Jonathan would change, mature, become someone I didn't need insurance against. But I'm a realist, and I know my son. The stroke happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was making lunch when I felt a sudden, intense headache. The room tilted. My left side went numb. I managed to call 911 before I collapsed. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU. The doctors said I was lucky. The stroke was significant, but I'd received treatment quickly enough to minimize permanent damage. I'd need physical therapy. I'd need speech therapy, but I'd recover. What I didn't know, lying in that hospital bed those 3 days, was that Jonathan had been busy. Patricia came to see me the day after the nurse told me about the house. She looked like she'd been up all night, which she probably had. "Catherine, we need to talk." "Tell me," I said. My speech was better, still slurred but comprehensible. "Jonathan filed paperwork to sell your house 2 days after you had the stroke. He forged a power of attorney document claiming you'd given him authority to handle your affairs. He forged your signature on the sales contract. The sale closed yesterday. Cash buyer. Jonathan walked away with $370,000. I closed my eyes. How? He exploited the fact that you were unconscious. He told the title company you'd had a stroke and he was acting under power of attorney. He presented forged documents that looked legitimate enough that they didn't question it. The buyer was probably in on it, paying cash, closing quickly, no inspection period. This was planned. Can we reverse it? I'm filing paperwork today to void the sale based on fraud. But Catherine, here's the problem. Proving Jonathan forged the documents will be difficult. He clearly practiced your signature. The power of attorney looks real. Unless we can prove you never gave him permission, unless we can establish a pattern of fraudulent behavior, I can prove it." Patricia stopped. "How?" "Evidence hidden in the house." "What kind of evidence?" "Recordings, documents, years of documentation showing his pattern of trying to steal from me." "Hidden in the walls?" Patricia stared at me. "You hid evidence in the walls of your house." "Yes." "The house Jonathan just sold." "Yes." Jesus, Catherine. That's either brilliant or insane. Both. I managed to smile despite everything. Need to contact the new owners. Tell them. What's there? Patricia pulled out her phone. I'll start making calls. The new owners of my house were a couple in their 30s named David and Laura Chen, no relation to Patricia. They'd bought the house as a fixer-upper, planning to renovate and either live in it or flip it. They'd closed on the property the day before Patricia contacted them. Patricia explained the situation carefully. The sale was fraudulent. We were working to void it, but in the meantime, if they planned to do any renovation work, they should know there were packages hidden in the walls that contained important legal documents. David and Laura were understandably skeptical. "Are you saying the seller's mother hid evidence in the walls?" David asked Patricia, according to her recounting of the conversation. "I'm saying there may be packages sealed into the walls that contain documents relevant to our fraud case. If you find them during renovation, I'm asking that you contact me immediately and preserve them as evidence. And if we don't find anything, then we pursue other avenues. But if you do find something, it could be crucial to establishing that Jonathan Blake committed fraud." David and Laura agreed to keep an eye out. They were scheduled to start renovation work the following week. I spent that week in the hospital, then in a rehabilitation facility, working on regaining strength and speech. Jonathan visited once. He sat in the chair next to my bed and held my hand and said all the things a concerned son should say. "I'm so glad you're okay. Mom, you scared us." "The house," I said, watching his face. He didn't flinch. "I know. I'm sorry I had to do that without talking to you first. But the property needed to be dealt with, and you weren't in a position to make decisions. I got a good price. The money's in an account for you. For your care, liar. Mom, you forged documents, stole my house. I helped you. That house was too much for you. You're going to need money for care. I was thinking of your future. You were thinking of your pocket." His face hardened. "I did what needed to be done. If you want to be ungrateful about it, that's your choice." He left. I never saw him again. 3 weeks after Jonathan sold my house, David and Laura Chen started their renovation. They began with the kitchen, ripping out old cabinets, removing the backsplash, exposing walls that hadn't been seen in decades. David called Patricia on a Tuesday afternoon. "We found something." "What did you find?" "A package. Sealed in waterproof plastic, hidden behind the backsplash exactly where you said to look. It has writing on it, to whom it may find this." Patricia drove to the house immediately. David and Laura showed her the package, a flat rectangular bundle about 8 by 10 inches, carefully sealed. They opened it together. Inside was everything I'd promised. USB drives with recordings of Jonathan asking me to add his name to the deed, to lend him money, to sell the house, and split the proceeds. Printed transcripts of those recordings, notarized. Financial documents showing the pattern of his requests. Screenshots of text messages between him and Melissa discussing how much my house would be worth and how they could get me to sell it. And the letter. My letter, explaining everything. Patricia called me from the house. "Catherine, we have it. We have everything," I cried. Not from relief, though there was relief, but from the vindication of being right. Right to protect myself, right to document, right to hide evidence against the day my son would try to destroy me. "There are more," I told Patricia. 11 more packages. Different locations in the house. Over the next month, as David and Laura continued their renovation, they found 8 more packages. Each contained similar evidence. Each reinforced the pattern. Each made Jonathan's fraud more and more impossible to deny. Patricia used the evidence to file criminal charges against Jonathan. The district attorney reviewed the case and agreed. This was fraud, forgery, elder abuse, theft. Multiple felonies. Jonathan was arrested at his office, handcuffed in front of his coworkers, led away while Melissa screamed at the police that this was a misunderstanding. The trial took 6 months. Jonathan's defense attorney tried every angle, claiming the power of attorney was real, claiming I'd given verbal permission, claiming I was mentally incompetent at the time of the sale. But the evidence I'd hidden told a different story. A story of years of attempted manipulation. A story of a son who'd been planning to steal from his mother long before the stroke gave him opportunity. The recordings were particularly damning. In one, from 3 years before the stroke, Jonathan could be heard saying to Melissa, "She's not going to live forever. When she goes, that house is mine. I just need to position myself to get access before she dies or gets too old to stop me." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Jonathan was found guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay restitution, not just the $370,000 he'd stolen, but additional damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and the cost of my medical care during the time I'd been fighting to recover my property. The sale of my house was voided. David and Laura Chen, who'd been remarkably patient and understanding throughout this entire process, agreed to sell the house back to me at the price they'd paid. They'd already invested money in renovation, so I offered to pay them for the improvements they'd made. They declined. "You've been through enough," Laura said. "The house is yours. We'll find another project." I moved back into my house 8 months after the stroke. It looked different. The kitchen had been partially renovated, some walls had been opened up and repaired, but it was still mine. Still the house where I'd raised my son, built my life, hidden my evidence. David and Laura had left the remaining 4 packages untouched. "In case you need them for appeals or other legal matters," David explained. I retrieved them, opened them, and finally destroyed the evidence I'd spent years protecting. I didn't need it anymore. Justice had been served. Jonathan is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 5 years. Melissa divorced him while he was awaiting trial. She brought my grandchildren to visit me once, shortly after the divorce was finalized. "I didn't know," she said, sitting in my living room. "I swear I didn't know he was planning to sell your house while you were in the hospital. The text about wanting to access your equity, I thought that was just talk, frustration. I didn't think he'd actually do it." "But you knew he wanted to," I said. My speech was almost back to normal by then, just a slight drag on my consonants. "Yes," he talked about it a lot. About how you were holding on to the house for sentimental reasons, about how you should downsize, about how the money would be better used for your care or for our family. "For your family," I repeated. "I know how it sounds. But Catherine, I loved him. I thought I loved him. And I wanted to believe he was trying to help you, not hurt you." "He was doing both," I said. "He was hurting me while telling himself, and you, that he was helping." Melissa brought the children to visit several more times over the following year. They're good kids, teenagers now, old enough to understand what their father did, young enough that they might forgive him eventually. I don't know if I will. I haven't decided yet. Patricia suggested I sell the house for real this time. "Catherine, you're 70 now. You've recovered from the stroke, but maintaining this property alone is a lot. Maybe Jonathan was right about one thing. Downsizing might make sense." "No," I said, stubborn. "I didn't fight this hard to keep my house just to give it up now. When I'm ready to leave, I'll leave. But it'll be my choice. Not Jonathan's, not anyone's but mine. I still live in my house. I'm 70 years old. I have a cleaning service that comes weekly. I have a handyman who does repairs. I have neighbors who check on me. And I have a house that's entirely mine, paid for with 47 years of my life, nearly stolen by my son and saved by my own paranoia and planning. People ask me sometimes if I regret having Jonathan, if knowing what he'd become, what he'd do, whether I'd choose differently. The answer is complicated. I don't regret him. He's my son, and despite everything, I loved him. I love him still. In that way, mothers love children who betray them. But I regret not seeing him clearly sooner. I regret making excuses for him. I regret hoping he'd change instead of preparing for the fact that he wouldn't. The evidence I hid in my walls, those 12 packages sealed away against disaster, they weren't just insurance against Jonathan's theft. They were insurance against my own denial. They were proof that I knew deep down what he was capable of, that I'd known for years, and that I'd been smart enough, strategic enough, paranoid enough to protect myself despite wanting to believe otherwise. My son sold my house while I was in the hospital. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought I was too weak, too trusting, too naive to have prepared for his betrayal. He was wrong. And what he didn't know, what he never could have imagined, was that his mother had spent years building a case against him, document by document, recording by recording, package by hidden package. The walls of my house held more than memories. They held evidence. They held truth. They held the justice I'd need when love finally wasn't enough to protect me from my own child. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, loved, trusted, please know, you're not alone. And you're not wrong to protect yourself, even from family, especially from family. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Stories about people who fought back, who documented, who refused to be victims even when the people hurting them were their own blood. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the strongest act of love is preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. And thank you for witnessing this story. In a world that tells us family should always come first, sometimes the truth is that we need to come first. Our safety, our property, our right to not be exploited by the people who should protect us.